Hello, everybody, and welcome to the last lecture of English 2367. This is K-Swizzle checking in for week 8 with a combined overview and focus lecture. I felt that it would be the best option in terms of the semester winding down, but also just because there's just a lot of things happening in the world. And I imagine between political burnout as well as just personal life burnout, this would sort of be hopefully a helpful way to reduce some of the things that you need to be thinking about. So my hope, like I said, is that by combining these lectures, it gives you one last thing to worry about. But as I mentioned, of course, in my Carmen message that I sent out yesterday, I also have really tried to create these slides in such a fashion that you can also consult them, as a standalone set of materials as opposed to listening to this lecture if that also is most conducive for your wellness and capacity. So really what I'm trying to say here is I hope that, the different methods I've taken with this week reduce some of the worry or stress that you have in some way. So let's go ahead and talk about the agenda. There are only 2 sections for this agenda, and it's divided between assignment snapshots or an overview of week 8 assignments, as well as thinking about the movement from a rough draft to a final project, or, kind of more broadly speaking, what it will take to really finish the course. And so when it comes to assignment snapshots, we'll be talking about the peer feedback on semester research project, the final draft of semester research project, and then the new edition of the alternative assignment, which is the detailed project outline of semester research project, which I'll get into more in a few minutes. When it comes to thinking about the movement from a rough draft to a final project, we're going to talk specifically about some revision strategies or what to consider this week, as well as offering a final project checklist that hopefully can be a useful companion for you as you work through the final project process. So just some updates for this week, and you can skip this if you read my Carmen message, but again, there's only one lecture for you to review this week, and you are welcome to either watch the lecture / listen to it, or read through the slides, whatever works best for you. I want to reiterate that I have my last 2 days of office hours this week, and they are Tuesday, June 28th from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Eastern via Zoom. And then I have extended office hours on Thursday, June 30th from 10 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. Eastern via Zoom. I want to note once again that I will not be available to discuss final project questions on Friday and Saturday. So if you have any questions for me, please make sure that you've sent them by Thursday in order to receive a response. I am, as always, happy to talk via email or during office hours or to set up an alternate appointment time. But just from having taught in past semesters and at this institution as well as another one, I just know from experience that if I keep my kind of email inbox open on Friday and Saturday when the assignment is due, I get too many questions from students that are kind of being sent too late in the game. And so to try to create a more feasible deadline for you, but also to protect my time as well, I'm really asking that you send those questions by Thursday at the latest. Finally, as I mentioned in my Carmen message, of course, I have decided to create an alternative assignment to the final project if you're experiencing just a number of things that can really restrict what you're able to get done for this week. I want to be really clear in saying that this was sort of not made as a split moment decision. This is something that I've been kind of thinking about over the last week, just given my conversations with some of y'all and just conversations with people in my life, and just being aware of the fact that many people are overwhelmed and stressed and burned out right now for a number of reasons. And so my hope is that the alternative assignment is something that can be just helpful to know as a backup plan for you if you find that it's just not feasible to do the complete final project as you had initially drafted prior to this week. So as always, you do have, of course, the schedule of assignments document on Carmen that walks you through the things that are due for this week. Of course, based on my Carmen message, there are some revisions and additions here. And so I just wanted to note that as we continue forward. So let's talk about the assignment snapshots, or thinking about the overview of week 8 assignments. First of which is the peer feedback on semester research project. Now, if you'll recall, this is going to be the second round of written feedback that you're providing to your peers based on the research project feedback that's mentioned in the syllabus, as counting for a total of 10% of your final grade. So you received the initial 5% of this research project feedback when you provided feedback to your peers on the research proposal. And the second 5% for this category will, of course, come from providing feedback on the semester research projects that you're looking at for this week. Now, I want to really emphasize that the deadline for peer feedback is Wednesday, June 29th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. And this is a hard deadline with no extended submissions accepted. Reason being, I should say, your peers need this feedback in order to, get some useful insight into some of the things they should be thinking about going into the final, and possibly also to consider, do they want to reroute their final project and decide instead to do the alternative assignment? And so if you're giving this feedback after Wednesday, it's just not going to be of use. And so it's going to be really important that you meet that Wednesday midnight deadline. I will not accept extended submissions under any circumstance. There have been a few issues this semester with, in terms of deadline extensions. You want to remember that when it comes to asking for a deadline extension, asking the day of is not a great plan because I likely won't see your request. And I really want to emphasize that for peer feedback, there is no opportunity to request an extended deadline because it does need to be provided to your peers so that they can actually use it. All right, now that logistical stuff has been covered, I want to talk about the prompt. It's pretty close to the peer feedback prompt that you saw prior when you were reviewing your peers' research proposals, in the sense that my goal with this peer feedback assignment is that it's giving you an opportunity to see how your peers are developing their final projects so that you also can consider, are there ways that you can maybe further refine and develop the methodology that you're thinking of working with for your final project. But also my goal as well is that, in the sense that, the final week of the semester is really when folks reach out to me in mass to get feedback. This is the most reliable way to ensure, beyond, setting up an appointment with me, that you get the feedback that can be beneficial as you move into this final draft of the final project. Now, how to complete this assignment is relatively straightforward, I think, and there are really kind of 3 steps that you need to take. So first, you want to open your semester survival group shared Google folder, and you want to click on the blue folder titled Submit Rough Draft Final Project, and this is going to be where you submitted your own rough draft of the final project. Now, when you go to this folder, you'll notice that there's now also a Google Doc titled Feedback Sign-up Sheet, group, and then A, B, C, or D, depending on what group you're in, and you will need to complete this form to indicate whose drafts you are responding to. Now I'm going to skip ahead to show what this looks like before coming back to the next steps. So like I said, in your semester survival group's shared Google folder, there is now a Google Doc that says Feedback Sign-up Sheet. And what it looks like is it reiterates the instructions of what you'll need to do for this peer feedback process. But basically, you'll see that each of the group members, it'll say under rough draft to review, and then it'll say the person's name and then project draft, okay? And so what you'll need to do is fill in your name within this chart so that folks are aware of whose projects you are providing feedback to, so that we can make sure that everybody in your group gets feedback, okay? So the reason why this is important is because you are expected to read and respond to 2 of your semester survival group members' rough drafts. You are not responding to all of them. You are only responding to 2 of your group members' rough drafts. And each draft that you read should feature the components of either the recommended rough draft or the minimum rough draft that I covered in slide 25 of the week 7 overview lecture, which I've hyperlinked here. For each rough draft, you're going to need to provide endnotes that are 400 to 500 words in length. And this feedback should be typed into a separate Google Doc or Word document file. And this file should be emailed to your peer with me copied on the email via Canva, or that should say Canvas, my apologies, Canvas Messenger or email address by Wednesday at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. So the idea here is that, if you'll recall, with the research proposal, you had the opportunity to either provide, comment annotations throughout the document, or you could provide endnotes that followed the research proposal. For this particular assignment, you are providing endnotes that are typed in a separate document, with the idea that because your peer might have, created Google Slides or another form, it might be a little difficult to type directly on the project, as well as, given that this is a working draft, your peer might not want comments made directly on the file itself. And so having your endnotes provided in a separate file is the best way to make sure that they can review those notes without them conflicting with the draft, okay? And so for the 2 semester survival group members whose work you respond to, you'll need to provide endnotes that respond to the ideas and writing presented in their rough draft of the final project. And this feedback can really be any of the following. And again, you're providing 400 to 500 words of feedback, which you can kind of imagine as almost being like a discussion board post in some respects, or like a real reaction, which you did earlier in the semester. right? So suggestions of kind of the type of feedback that you might want to provide to your peers include suggestions on how to further revise the thesis statement for clarity, observations about what works well or what needs to be added to the introductory section of the project, recommendations for what to cover in the context section of the project, suggestions for or reactions to the primary source close reading draft or drafts that are offered in this rough draft or that could be included in the final draft, questions or comments about secondary source connection draft or drafts that are offered in the rough draft or that could be included in the final draft, and ideas about what could be covered in the concluding section of the project. So what I'm getting at here is that you can either respond to what is already covered in this draft or also consider providing some suggestions for some additions that might be useful to the final draft that don't currently appear in this rough draft. And so I also wanted to just mention that wherever you can provide affirmations about the project is just as important as providing your peers with ideas for revision. And by this, I mean that it's important that your feedback offers not only suggestions, but encouragement as well. If you see something in the project draft that's working really well, that's really interesting, that you're really drawn to, don't hesitate to express that to your peer because you really want to offer that encouragement as they're in this final stretch and they're trying to finish strong for the semester. Okay. So again, this is the expectations for the peer feedback at this stage. You pick 2 peers. What you'll do is you will sign up for which 2 peers you're providing feedback to, and you'll enter your name either into the reviewer number 1 or reviewer number 2 column, right? And so what you'll need to do is make sure that you sign up to provide 2 of your group members with feedback, and each of those group members should get the 400 to 500 word endnotes that are typed in a separate document and provided via email or Canvas Messenger. Now, in addition to providing peer feedback to 2 group members, you of course are also turning in the final draft of your semester research project this week. Now, I've covered this prompt previous to now, but I just want to remind you of some of the big things, right? One of which is that this has a fixed deadline of Saturday, July 2nd at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. I will not accept a late submission, even if it comes in at like 12:03 on Sunday. It has to be turned in at this time because what is so important is that I have a university grading deadline to meet and it's like literally the next day. And so if I get your final project late, I don't have the time to grade it, which means that I won't be able to turn in your grade to the university. So it is crucial that you meet this Saturday deadline because I've given you as much time as I can based on like what the university's overarching grade deadline is that won't impact your own schedule of like receiving your scores, okay? I also want to remind you that all final projects should feature a works cited page in MLA format, as well as proper in-text citations when you are referencing secondary sources. If you have questions about one or both of these things, I am more than happy to talk about that this week. And please, please, please double check any tech issues that you might be navigating because I cannot accept like a delayed submission based on tech issues because it's out of my hands when it comes to the university. So please double check these things in advance, okay? In terms of the prompt, you already know this needs to be a thesis-driven, sophisticated argument that you're making in relationship in some regards to social media discourse, thinking about the things we've talked about with self-representation and pop culture and media studies, and just really thinking about how are you offering an argument that really builds on or is related in some way to the conversations we've had this semester. You also want to remember that you'll need to have 5 secondary connections minimum to relevant research and offer, of course, substantial close readings of the primary source or sources that you've decided to move forward with for your final. You have received a significant amount of feedback from me on the research proposal and the literature review that is intended to give you some suggestions on how you should be thinking about these primary source close readings and the secondary source connections. Please, please, please make sure that you're really thinking about that as you're going into this final and really pay attention to the feedback you get from your peers to make sure that everything you're putting together is clear, okay? And of course, organization is going to be really important to make sure that your ideas are coming through effectively. Structure, once again, you've got the option between a traditional research paper or a creative option. I am always partial to the creative option because I think it's just like, in terms of your brain, can be a nice like creative outlet and break compared to a research paper. However, if you know that a research paper is comfortable for you, tried and true method, do the research paper. But if you find that doing some kind of creative option is going to make it easiest for you to communicate your ideas, go with that. I offer these kind of multiple options for form because I know that different students communicate in different methodologies and just ways. And I always want to make sure that the final project is set up in such a way that you can use a form that is most conducive to your success. And I really want you to think consciously about, in terms of the relationship between the content and form in your project, based on the content or message that you're planning to make or convey to your reader through your argument, how is it that the form you've selected allows you to most effectively communicate your argument? Again, examples of potential forms for this final project: research essay, zine, comic, political cartoons, a video or film, a Zoom recording or talk through, a YouTube video essay, a web blog or digital journal, a social media profile, PowerPoint or Google Slides presentation, a podcast episode, a music arrangement. Any or all of these would be great. I have provided some examples of final projects that I encourage you to take a look at. I think that they would be really helpful to consult, to just kind of think about how have students in the past utilized creative forms as well as traditional essay forms to convey their argument. Now, what I also want to talk about here is your alternative assignment, which is the detailed project outline of the semester research project. Now, this prompt is available on Carmen in the week 8 weekly module. And what I want to talk about here is just kind of, again, my rationale for providing this alternative assignment, but also to explain what the heck that it is. Okay. Now, it's important to note that the alternative assignment has the same deadline as the complete final project, meaning that it has to be turned in by Saturday, July 2nd at 11:59 p.m. Eastern, no exceptions. If I don't get it from you at that time, it's considered missing and you get a 0. Okay. Now, I already kind of started to clarify why I decided to provide an alternative assignment in the Carmen message that I sent this week. What I really want to kind of get into here is just kind of talking about this being an option for you, right? So this is an optional assignment, meaning that you do not have to do this assignment if you would decide or would prefer to keep with the final project you had already intended to do, okay? And the reason I say this is because if you already feel comfortable and confident with your project as is, you can completely disregard this prompt and skip past this. But this is here and meant to be a backup plan if you're panicking, overwhelmed, unsure that like the final project you had kind of conceptualized in these last few weeks is just not going to be feasible based on any, combination of perhaps like unforeseen changes to your personal life, unanticipated significant burnout that you're experiencing, or if you're navigating symptoms from temporary or chronic illness that are severely impacting your current capacity. In my mind, it's important to provide this option because, again, I don't want you to feel that you have to disclose to me what's going on in your life. And I want you to have this kind of additional option in case it's more feasible and just frankly, just more possible to complete than perhaps the final project in full. Okay. And so what the heck is this alternative assignment? It's like the what if or a sketch of like, this is what I was planning to do. Okay. And so what this does that's different from the complete final project is the complete final project is all about executing the final project how you plan to do it, right? Combining all of the steps of the semester research project and following through on the argument that you proposed you'd like to make. The detailed project outline of semester research project is different in the sense that here you are talking through, here's what I would have done if I had the capacity to do the project in full. So you can think about it more as a really detailed step-by-step walkthrough or sketch of this is what I was planning on if I had the capacity to complete it. And I'm going to talk you through why I was planning to do what I was going to do. And so what the prompt tasks you with then is preparing a detailed project outline of every step that you would have followed to produce your complete final project if you had the capacity to execute it in full. This outline should be structured as a Google Slides presentation, and it should be paired with a Zoom video recording of you talking through the slides as they are displayed on your screen. The recording can either be a video recording with you visible in speaker view as the slides are displayed on your screen, or it can be a video recording exclusively of the slides with your voice audible as a voiceover. For steps on how to record a shared screen, review the instructions that I've hyperlinked here. The Zoom file, I want to note, should be recorded to the cloud instead of to the computer. And for steps on how to share a cloud recording file with me, you'll want to review the instructions I've also hyperlinked here. Now, you have examples of both of these approaches for a Zoom lecture or Zoom talk through based on how I've done my lectures this semester. So obviously the version of the lecture you're listening to / watching right now is the second option, where it's a video lecture that exclusively is displaying the slides and then you're hearing my voice as a voiceover. Alternatively, you've also had some Zoom lectures from me where you see me on screen concurrent to me talking through the video. Or the slides that are displayed on the video. And so you'll want to decide which of these two options you'll want to go with. But it's important to note that this is another major difference between the detailed project outline and the complete final project. With the complete final project, you have your own selection of what form you'd like to use. Whereas if you decide to go with the detailed project outline, you have to use the form that I've outlined here, and you'll follow specifically the prompt that is provided on the next slide. So there's a lot less choice to this option compared to the complete final project, where you can really customize it to your liking. All right, so how do you complete this assignment if you decide you want to do the detailed project outline instead of doing the complete final project? You'll want to follow all of these steps to closely satisfy all of the requirements, okay? So step one is that you'll need to create a Google Slides presentation, and the total slide count for your project should be 10 slides. If you find that you need to go over a little bit, that's okay. But in this scenario, because again, this is meant to be a backup plan and used if you have reduced capacity, 10 slides is really what I'm expecting from you, okay? Now, the first slide should feature your project title and the info you would provide in an MLA header. So name, instructor name, date, class, etc. I want to really emphasize that when it comes to project title, it shouldn't just be final project. It should be something specific to the argumentative intervention you were planning to make with this project, okay? The second slide should offer a content overview of what the Zoom talk through will cover, and it should explain what the sequence of your slides consists of and how you will be taking your reader through the process of developing your semester research project. So what this means is, like, this is your version of the on the agenda slide that I provide in each Google Slides presentation. And the reason that you want to provide a content overview is you want to demonstrate that you're thinking through how you are putting all of these parts of your project together. And in this context or this situation of doing a Zoom talk through, you always want to provide a kind of content overview up front, because it helps your reader or listener know what to expect as you proceed onwards. Now, the third and fourth slides of your presentation should recap what you produced for your research proposal. And this review should include discussion of your research topic, a recap of your guiding research questions, the argumentative intervention you plan to make in your project, and the methodology you plan to take in your project. You should also discuss what form your project would have taken had you completed the complete final project. So what these slides are really doing is reminding your viewer, what did you turn in for the research proposal? And what was your initial thought process and kind of, process of putting this together at the stage of the research proposal? So this is really laying out for your audience what were kind of the origins of this project and what were you conceptualizing as being where the final would grow to. Now, the fifth slide is going to be where you should discuss how your thesis statement specifically evolved from the research proposal to the literature review to the final project. What changed, what stayed the same. So here's where you're going to really want to think about, what kinds of feedback did you get from me and your peers, right? Did you maybe not even have a thesis statement when you were at the research proposal stage? Did you have one at the research proposal stage, but you added different wording or phrasing or different, primary sources that you plan to cite, right? Like, what evolved between each of these assignments? And in thinking about those evolutions, what would your final thesis statement for the final project have been, okay? And so this slide is really about showing the evolution of your argument and the evolution of how this thesis would have guided that final project. Now, the sixth and seventh slides should explain the following, and it focuses specifically on how you would use your literature review in the final project. So if you had the capacity to complete your project in full, how and where would you have used secondary sources in your final? Would you have offered a context section? Would you have made secondary source connections in the close reading section? Do you anticipate that you would have brought in new sources that are not included in your literature review? Why or why not? And so these two slides are really about you anticipating or speculating, how would you have advanced or utilized all of the work that you put into that literature review in some capacity in your final project? Would you have a context section that takes all of the lit review sources and places them there? Would you have, moments in the body of your project where you really offer those kind of, pie decorations or like secondary source enhancements that I've talked about in the lecture, right? Where would the work of the literature review have factored into your final project? Now, the 8th and 9th slides should explain the following, and this is concentrated on your primary source close readings. So if you had the capacity to complete your project in full, how would you have performed your primary source close readings in your final? How many primary sources would you have used? And what details in particular would you have focused on? How would they have helped you to show your argument in action? So this is really getting at kind of the close reading section of your paper or project and clarifying, if you had been able to do the project in full, what would you have done, or in terms of the types of close readings you would have performed? And then finally, the 10th slide is really kind of focused on your concluding section and should explain the following of, if you had the capacity to complete your project in full, what do you think would have been your takeaways from the project? What do you hope that a reader or viewer of your project would have taken away from it? And how does this project represent what you learned in class this semester? So if you were in a position that you were able to wrap up the project, how would you have set up this concluding section to have these key takeaways for your reader? Now, the final steps here then are, once you have completed this Google Slides presentation, you'd want to set your slides to presentation view and record yourself talking through the presentation via Zoom. And this recorded talk through should help guide a viewer of your presentation through what is covered and any other relevant details that you want to provide. And then you'll want to share that cloud recording of the Zoom talk through with me by the Saturday at the 11:59 p.m. Eastern deadline. Okay. So again, in total, there are these various steps that really walk you through how you would create this combination of the Google Slides presentation coupled with the Zoom talk through. And the idea is that you're presenting a 10-slide presentation that you then verbally kind of talk through or walk through, that allows you to really establish what you would have done if you had been in the position to get this project done. And again, a key difference between this alternative assignment and the final project is that instead of actually executing, for example, the primary source close readings, you explain what you would have liked to have done if you had the capacity to get it done, okay? Now, finally, let's talk about, from a rough draft to a final project, finishing the course. And these are really some kind of key takeaways for everyone, regardless of just, thinking about what form and just kind of mode you ultimately decide to finish your project in. So I want to keep these revision strategies in mind, especially just to kind of consider for this week of how do you even move from a rough draft to a final. Now, of course, with the semester research project, you have done the research proposal and the literature review to help lead you to this place of even completing the final project. And I wanted to just offer this reminder that throughout the 3-step semester research project, you have successfully determined what type of argument pie you would like to bake. You've sketched out your recipe card for how you would like to bake this pie. You've completed the pre-work of preheating the oven and preparing your ingredients. You've completed secondary research to prepare the literature review garnish that will enhance the taste of your argument pie. And you began to anticipate how you will pour pie filling close readings into the crust to satisfy the scope of your thesis. At each stage of the process, you received feedback to help you refine your technique and best utilize your ingredients. And now it's time to bake your pie. So when it comes to thinking about methods for refining your argument, and specifically the argument that you started with in the research proposal, added to with the literature review, and now are refining with your final project, I have a few suggestions. Now, I'm not going to read each of these suggestions out exhaustively in terms of how they're written out. My hope is that this can kind of be a useful study guide of sorts that you can really consult in sort of a detailed manner as you're looking at these slides, but I'm going to kind of synthesize these sections to give you the highlights of them. So when it comes to the overall project, Big thing you want to think about is that organization is crucial for this project. You want to really consider, how are you indicating for your reader what types of moves you're making? Can you do some signposting to indicate what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how you're doing that in such a way that's meant to show certain things about your argument? You especially want to think about how you can utilize signposting in such a way that it builds off of the initial methodology statement in the introductory section, in the sense of what you are indicating that you're planning to do and how you're planning to execute it. Having that kind of information established up front in your intro section will make future signposting especially effective. But really, really, really think about outlining how you're going to organize your project. And of course, taking time to outline is one of our foundational writing pre-work steps that we talked about in week 1. Now, for the introductory section of your project, I wanted to note that intro sections can be longer than 1 paragraph and are often most effective when they are at least 2 to 3 paragraphs in length. I like to kind of make the suggestion that you can think about the first paragraph in your intro section as being your topic introduction or overview, which you all have started to tackle, of course, with the research proposal and lit review intro. The second paragraph can really be where your elaboration of argument happens, in terms of establishing your thesis and building into the argument that you're making. And that third paragraph can often be where that context section comes into play. And so you'll want to consider, does your project benefit from having a context section where potentially you can really build on or expand on that elaboration of argument by offering some insight into historical or socio-political context on the content creator or the content of your primary source or sources? Is there relevant background information that should be provided on your topic, or insight into the scholarly or popular conversation that's happening that you think your reader should have up front to be able to move onwards in your project? Now, for the close reading or body section of your project, you'll want to remember that you'll need to produce clear primary source close readings that really establish how you are showing your concepts in action or your argument in action, by really demonstrating some key examples that really get at what it is that you're arguing and talking about. Right? And as a reminder, these primary source close readings, or the pie filling for your argument pie, should make a significant contribution to your project and help satisfy the scope of your argument that is produced by your thesis pie crust. You can really think then about, if we go back to kind of the earlier formula that we talked about, of having a claim with a rationale and support, or evidence, right? We can really understand then that the primary source close readings acts as that support or evidence follow through that expands on the argumentative claim that you make in each paragraph and in the project overall, and that really help to back up the rationale that you're providing as kind of an extension on those claims. When it comes to citing secondary sources, you'll really want to think strategically about how and where you will integrate your literature review into your project. As a reminder, the literature review that you produced between week 6 and 7 is slightly different, in the sense that you in that assignment were really vetting each secondary source by following the discus synthesis method to consider how you might use those secondary sources in your project. But in the project itself, you're going to want to think about, how are you formally integrating quotes or paraphrases from a minimum of 5 secondary sources into your writing that will really help you to back up the argumentative claims that you're making. This would also be a great opportunity to revisit the kind of argumentation strategy suggestions from So What and Who Says, as well as looking back at the treat writing formula that I have provided in previous slides to help you think about how you can formulate this kind of organization. Now, with the concluding section, you'll want to create a robust concluding section, or a pie tin or plate, that supports the overall argument pie. And you want to carefully consider what the lasting takeaways are for your project and how the conclusion can synthesize the work that you produced. And I have a recipe card on the following slide that will talk you through some things to think about here. But finally, if you're doing a creative option, oftentimes students who do decide to pursue a creative option will offer some kind of 1 to 2 page reflection, similar to an afterword, or some kind of opening or overview, much like an author's note or preface, that articulates how developing the project's form synthesizes what you learned in the class about communicating a message. I have hyperlinked some examples for what an afterword or preface or author's note might look like. And I encourage you to really think about if this would be beneficial to your project. If you are deciding to go with a creative option, Less so realistically if you're doing a Google Slides, but oftentimes it could be very beneficial for folks who are doing comics or zines or any number of those types of creative options. Now, as I just mentioned, I do offer a baking recipe card for creating a concluding section for the final project. It is uploaded to Carmen, so you are able to see this graphic under the week 8 module. But I've also kind of, what's it called? Not blown up, but like expanded the graphic on the right side of the screen so that you can see this information a little bit closer. But I'll just kind of briefly mention what a concluding section that is effective in a final project ideally will offer to the reader in some capacity. And so we can see that there's a few core ingredients. The first of which is a review of the project topic, or really clarifying what topical focus related your project to the primary and secondary sources you cited. So this is about circling back to the topical overview you've really provided in that first paragraph of the introductory section. A synthesis of intervention significance, or really establishing what your argument contributed to the popular or scholarly discourse on your topic. And if you look back at the research proposal, some of kind of what is talked about there can be helpful for thinking about this. You'll also want to provide an assessment of the methodology impact, or a clarification on how the way you structured your project and argument helped you to show your thesis in action. A recap of the literature review contribution, or discussion of how the secondary source connections you made throughout your final project ultimately contributed to your project and analysis in a meaningful way, right? How did bringing in those secondary sources allow you to really support your argument or kind of nuance the conversation? A recap of close readings contribution, or a discussion of, how is it that the primary source or sources close readings that you performed added to your analysis? What did that allow you to show or exemplify? And finally, an optional discussion of limitations, in the sense that if you were unable to cover something in this project that you would like to cover, or that you think someone else could cover in a future project, what would that be? Like, what does that consist of, right? Where there's some limitations to what you could get done, or some limitations to what you couldn't cover that could be well covered by another project. Now, if you find that you are nervous about completing and or submitting your final project, I have compiled a checklist for you to ensure that you've completed everything that you need to do. Now, this checklist is very straightforward in the sense that it specifically outlines things related from the prompt that you want to have kind of on your mind. And I've broken it into a few suggestions, a few sections: logistics and tech, feedback, content, and formatting. And what I've tried to do with this checklist is offer you a way of kind of making sure that you've done all of the things that you need to do for your final project so that you can have peace of mind when you submit it by Saturday. Okay. And so the logistics and tech section really tackles things related to the actual process of submitting the document, right? Making sure that your project, in whatever form it's in, is accessible to me, really establishing that I need to be able to access it right away, and that I can't follow up with you to get access to the document if you didn't properly take care of that before submitting the assignment. And so really reminding you of the importance of double checking the logistical issues related to submitting your project to make sure that we're not in the position where you get a 0 on the project because you didn't submit it properly. The feedback section of this checklist really tackles reminding you of when you received feedback from myself and from your peers, and encouraging you to really think about how you can factor that into your process of completing this final. The content section of this checklist is really about providing you with some suggestions for thinking about how you're organizing your argument, where you're placing things, what each of the sections of your project should feature in some capacity. Reminding you to take a look back at the week 6 and week 7 focus lectures, since they give a lot of information about secondary source connections and citations, and really just trying to remind you of some of the key things that you need to have on your mind as you're developing the argument and message of your project. And the formatting section of this checklist is really tackling things related to MLA formatting, encouraging you to think carefully about which form or medium are you ultimately deciding to work with for your project, and making sure that you're choosing one that's sort of best suited to most effectively convey your argument and message, and really kind of reminding you to think about where you're providing the works cited page for me, especially if you are doing a creative option. All right, everybody, that is everything that I have for you today in English 2367. My hope is that this checklist, the alternative assignment, the project prompts, as well as the recipe card for the concluding section are helpful, as well as the kind of tips for thinking about revising your final project. I hope that all of that is helpful for you as you go about finishing the course this week. As I said, I've got office hours on Tuesday and Thursday if you'd like to check in, but I'm also happy to talk via email up until Thursday. So please don't hesitate to send any questions my way that you may have. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of the week, and I've had a great time having you in class this semester. Take good care, everybody.